Welcome back to Northeast Legends and Stories, where we dive deep into the rich tapestry of New England's past, uncovering tales that have shaped its history and captured imaginations across generations. Some stories from our region don't just fade into old newspapers. They grip the nation, expose the raw edges of society, and echo through books and courtrooms for over a century. Today, we're heading to the wilds of New York's Adirondacks, not far from our New England borders, to recount the heartbreaking murder of Grace Brown by Chester Gillette in 1906. This isn't a quick, sensational headline, it's a slow-burning tragedy of young love, shattered promises, and a desperate act that laid bare the brutal inequalities of early 20th century life. We'll start with the lives of Grace and Chester, two factory workers whose paths crossed in a Cortland skirt mill, then trace their secret romance, the pregnancy that trapped them, and the fateful trip to Big Moose Lake where it all unraveled. Along the way, we'll weave in the societal norms of the time, the grueling factory shifts for young women like Grace, the stigma of unwed motherhood that could ruin a life, and the class chasm that let men like Chester chase dreams while women paid the price. The trial that followed gripped the country, with love letters read aloud in court, and a verdict that sealed a young man's fate. If you're driving the back roads near the Adirondacks or reflecting on how far we've come in 100 years, this episode's for you. It's a heavy one, grounded in facts from letters, trial transcripts, and eyewitness accounts. A reminder of love's dark side in an era without second chances. Let's step back to Cortland in 1905. To understand this tragedy, we have to start in the humming heart of upstate New York's industrial boom. Cortland, a bustling mill town of about 10,000 souls, nestled in the Finger Lakes region where creeks powered factories and the air carried the scent of dye vats and fresh-cut fabric. It was the early 1900s, a time when America's factories were magnets for young folks from rural families, promising steady wages in exchange for long hours under gas lamps. Women like Grace Brown, fresh from farm life, flooded these places. By 1910, over a third of the workforce in Cortland's mills were women under 25, sewing skirts and blouses for city department stores. But the work was backbreaking. 12-hour shifts 6 days a week, fingers pricked by needles, lungs thick with cotton dust, and pay barely enough for room and board. Societal norms kept women in these roles. Marriage or motherhood was expected soon after, but unwed pregnancy was a scarlet letter, branding a girl as ruined and barring her from respectable jobs or matches. Families hid such scandals, sending daughters to visiting relatives until the child was quietly adopted, or worse, forcing desperate choices. Men, meanwhile, faced fewer chains. A factory job could launch social climbs, especially for those with family ties, in a class system where blue-collar roots clashed with white-collar ambitions. Enter Grace and Chester, two lives colliding in this pressure cooker. Grace May Brown was born on March 20th, 1886, in the tiny hamlet of South Selleck in Chenango County, about 60 miles east of Cortland. She was the third of 6 children to John and Mary Brown, dairy farmers who scratched out a living on a modest spread of rocky fields and pastures, milking Holsteins by hand and churning butter for the local market. Life there was plain and predictable. Grace helped with chores from dawn, slopping pigs and weeding gardens, attending the one-room schoolhouse where she excelled in reading and penmanship, earning the nickname Billy from her love of the ragtime tune Bill Bailey, Won't You Please Come Home. She was close to her teacher, Maud Kenyon Crum, who later recalled Grace as a bright, affectionate girl with a quick laugh and a kind heart. By her late teens, Grace dreamed bigger, away from the isolation of farm winters, toward the excitement of town work. In 1899, at age 18, she moved to Cortland to live with her married older sister Ada and her husband, boarding in a cramped tenement near the mills. Grace found a job at the Gillette Skirt Factory, a modern operation opened in 1904 by Frank Gillette, churning out pleated wool skirts for Sears catalogs at 20 cents an hour. Decent money for a single woman, enough to send a few dollars home and buy a new hat on Sundays. She was popular at the factory, known for her steady hands on the sewing machines and her habit of signing notes "The Kid" after Billy the Kid dime novels she devoured in spare time. Grace was pretty in a fresh-faced way, dark hair pinned up, blue eyes, and a figure softened by farm cooking, But she was earnest, raised with values of hard work and quiet faith in the Methodist Church. Chester Ellsworth Gillette, born November 8th, 1883, near Binghamton, about 30 miles south, came from a different world. His father, a peripatetic Methodist minister, dragged the family across the Midwest and South for postings, leaving Chester with a spotty education and a restless spirit. By his early 20s, he'd bounced through odd jobs, clerking in Chicago stores, laboring on Illinois railroads, before landing in Cortland in early 1905, thanks to his mother's brother, Frank Gillette, who owned the skirt factory. At 21, Chester was handsome. Tall, athletic build from pickup baseball games, wavy brown hair, and a charming smile that turned heads at church socials. Frank gave him a cushy supervisory role overseeing the women on the sewing floor, which put him in daily contact with Grace. But Chester chafed at the blue-collar grind. He fancied himself above it, quoting poetry from his brief college stint and eyeing the better-class girls at Cortland's skating rinks and picnics. Societal norms favored men like him. Factory nepotism opened doors, and a dalliance with a factory girl was overlooked as youthful folly so long as it didn't threaten reputation. Chester dated several women openly, including Harriet Benedict, a banker's daughter, but with Grace, it started as a flirtation in December 1905. Stolen glances over bolts of fabric, notes passed during lunch breaks, and evening walks along the Tew-Nioga River where he'd kiss her under the willows. Their romance bloomed fast in the factory's shadows. By January 1906, they were lovers, meeting in rented rooms or behind the mill after shifts. Grace fell hard, seeing Chester as her ticket out. Marriage, a home away from the farm, perhaps children in a parlor with lace curtains. Chester, though, treated it as a diversion. He bragged to friends about conquests and kept seeing Harriet, who represented the social leap he craved. By March 1906, Grace realized she was pregnant, about 3 months along, confirmed by a discreet doctor in town. In that era, options for an unwed mother were grim. Abortion was illegal and dangerous, often performed by back-alley practitioners with knitting needles, carrying risks of infection or death. Adoption meant surrendering the child quietly, but stigma followed like a shadow, barring remarriage or community standing. Grace confided in Chester immediately, pleading for marriage in tear-stained letters she mailed to his boarding house. "My dear Chester," she wrote on March 22nd, "I am afraid that I am going to have a baby. You know how I love you, and I know you love me. I have trusted you fully, and now I am yours for life." Chester promised to make it right, suggesting they elope or go to a maternity home. But he stalled, traveling to upstate resorts with factory friends while Grace returned to South Otselic in April, her belly starting to show under loose dresses. From the farm, she poured her heart into nearly daily letters. Over 60 survived, archived at Hamilton College, mixing devotion with desperation. "I love you more than ever," she wrote April 10th. "But oh, I am so unhappy. If you do not want me, tell me and let me go." Chester's replies were sparse and evasive, postmarked from Albany or Saratoga, assuring her soon. But he confided to a cousin, "I wish she would go away." As spring turned to summer, Grace's pleas grew frantic, her family noticing her withdrawal. Meals untouched, walks alone by the creek. Societal pressures crushed her. In rural Chenango County, an illegitimate child meant whispers at church, lost suitors, and burden on her parents, who already struggled with farm debts. Women in Grace's position often faced institutionalizations in asylums disguised as homes for fallen women. Or worse, infanticide hushed up as accidents. By June, Grace was 5 months along, her letters a torrent. "Dearest one, why don't you write? I am so lonesome and unhappy without you." Chester, back in Cortland, dodged her, romancing Harriet at 4th of July picnics with ice cream and fireworks, his uncle pushing him toward a promotion. But Grace persisted, wiring money for his train fare and begging a rendezvous. Finally, on July 1st, Chester wired agreement. He'd take her to the Adirondacks for a vacation, promising to settle everything. Grace packed her entire wardrobe, silk waists, skirts, a new hat, into a trunk, telling her sister Ada it was for a job interview, her heart lifting at the thought of marriage amid the lakes. Chester packed light, a suitcase with a change of clothes, a book of poetry, and a tennis racket strapped outside, bought for factory games but heavy enough for darker purpose. The journey north began July 10th, 1906, a sweltering Tuesday when temperatures topped 90 in Cortland. Grace, in a blue serge suit to hide her figure, met Chester at the Lehigh Valley Depot, her trunk checked through to Tupper Lake. They boarded the train amid summer crowds, families with picnic baskets, salesmen with sample cases, Grace clutching his arm, whispering plans for a justice of the peace. Chester, sweating in his wool suit, stared out the window, his mind elsewhere. They switched trains in Utica, registering that night at the Hotel Utica as Mr. and Mrs. Charles George, but skipped the bill at dawn, a petty theft that later damningly showed his deceit. North to Tupper Lake by noon July 11th, they checked into the Glenmore Hotel as Carl Graham and wife, Grace beaming as the clerk handed keys, though her trunk stayed at the station. Rain fell hard that afternoon, soaking the pines and turning trails to mud. So after a tense lunch of cold chicken, they boarded another train south to Big Moose Lake, a pristine Adirondack gem straddling Herkimer and Hamilton counties. 30 miles of glassy water ringed by spruce and granite, a playground for wealthy campers from New York City escaping the heat. It was the height of summer season. Steamboats ferried guests to lodges like the Killarney or Eagle Bay House, where trout fishing and canoeing drew artists and industrialists. For working folks like them, it was a rare treat, rowboats rentable for $0.10 an hour. They arrived at the Arrowhead Hotel and Inlet around 4 p.m., a rustic inn on the lake's northwest shore with creaky porches and kerosene lamps. Chester signed the register Carl Graham, New York, Grace adding a flourish, her face flushed with hope. The clerk, Robert Morrison, noted her trunkless arrival and quiet demeanor. They took room 12, a simple space with twin beds, a wash basin, and lake views through gingham curtains. Grace unpacked her hatbox, chattering about names for the baby, perhaps Ruth or John, while Chester paced, claiming a headache from the train. Around 5:30, as rain eased to mist, he suggested a boat ride to clear the air, strapping his tennis racket to his suitcase visibly, a T-bar frame of hickory and gut strings weighing nearly 3 pounds. Grace, trusting, changed into a white shirtwaist and dark skirt, leaving her hat on the bed. They walked to the Glenmore dock half a mile away, renting a 14-foot rowboat from boatman James H. Buckley for 15 cents. Chester rowing with practice strokes from factory crew races. Grace trailing fingers in the cool water, chatting about their future home. The boat glided east into South Bay, a secluded arm of the lake shielded by Arrowhead Island's birches, where the water deepened to 50 feet, and loons called across the fog. Witnesses at the Glenmore, waitress Nellie George and guest Charles Chapman, saw them pass around 6 p.m., Grace waving cheerfully, Chester's face set. They rowed about a mile in to a spot near the island's lee, the boat rocking gently as the sun dipped behind the Moose River hills. What happened next is pieced from autopsy, trial testimony, and Chester's shifting accounts. But the prosecution's case was ironclad, premeditation born of panic. Grace, 5 months pregnant and emotional, confronted him again. About marriage, the baby, her family's worry. Chester later claimed she suddenly jumped overboard in despair, fully dressed and unable to swim. But evidence screamed otherwise. Around 6:30 p.m., he struck her twice on the head with the tennis racket's T-frame, fracturing her skull and stunning her. The blows left crescent-shaped bruises matching the strings, blood flecking the boat's gunwale. Grace toppled into 8 feet of water, her skirt tangling as she thrashed weakly, calling, "Help! Chester! He has killed me!" Before sinking, her body carried by currents. Chester rowed back leisurely, docking at 7:15 p.m., telling Buckley the boat swamped in a squall and Grace drowned trying to bail. He ate supper alone at the Glenmore, ham and eggs, pie for dessert, chatting with Chapman about baseball scores, then hiked 3 miles to the Arrowhead, retrieving his suitcase and retiring early, the racket stashed in bushes. Grace's body surfaced the next morning, July 12th, around 8 a.m., spotted by hotel guest Harry Hayes, floating face down near the island, her dark hair fanned like ink, skirt bloated with lake water. Dr. John T. McDonald, the Herkimer County coroner, performed the autopsy that afternoon in Little Moose, confirming drowning as cause but noting 2-inch skull fractures on the right temple and forehead, consistent with blunt force from a racket or oar, plus a 4.5-month fetus. Word spread fast through the resort circuit. Telegraphs to Utica papers, guests packing trunks in shock. Grace's trunk arrived from Tupper Lake, monogrammed with her initials, packed with hopeful finery. Lace collars, a wedding veil tucked in tissue. Identification came via a locket with her photo and a note from Ada. Dearest Grace, write soon. Chester, meanwhile, decamped to Eagle Bay, registering as Charles Chapman and joining a hiking party up Black Bear Mountain that afternoon. Laughing at jokes and snapping photos with a borrowed Kodak, his suitcase lighter without the racket. Suspicion fell quick. Buckley mentioned the swamping tale to Constable Bert D. Seeley, who wired Cortland and learned of the missing girl. On July 14th, Seeley and District Attorney George W. Ward arrested Chester at the Eagle Bay house during lunch. Ham sandwiches and lemonade, finding bloodstains on his cuffs after a search. Extradited to Herkimer, he confessed nothing, claiming Grace jumped in a fit of despondency over their breakup, but his calm post-murder jaunt and evasive hotel bills painted a colder picture. Grace's family arrived by train, her father John weeping over the body at the undertaking parlor, Ada identifying the clothes. The letters, 63 in all, bundled in Chester's room, were seized as evidence, their tender pleas, "I love you so, my heart aches for you," turning public heartbreak. The trial opened November 12, 1906, in the Herkimer County Courthouse, a Greek revival hall packed with 300 spectators, reporters from the New York World, society ladies in feathered hats, farmers in overalls. Judge Ira A. Place presided, Ward prosecuting. Defense led by notorious ambulance chaser Amos Deford. It lasted 3 weeks, front-page fodder nationwide, with crowds lining up at dawn. The prosecution hammered premeditation, the isolated bay, the heavy racket, recovered splintered from bushes, strings bloodied, autopsy fractures incompatible with a jump, and Chester's failure to raise alarm or dive in. Lifeguards testified a strong swimmer like him could have saved her in seconds. Witnesses painted Grace's devotion. Sister Ada sobbing over letters read aloud. "Oh, Chester, if you knew how I suffer, marry me and make me happy." Factory friend Billy Brown, no relation, recalling Grace's glow at mentions of him. Chester's nonchalance post-murder was damning, hiking while her body cooled, flirting with waitresses. The defense spun suicide, Grace melancholy from pregnancy hormones, letters showing her desire to end it, the boat capsizing in wind, though calm that evening. Chester testified coolly on November 29th. "We quarreled about Harriet. She rose suddenly and jumped, skirt over her head, crying, 'I will end it.' I rowed for help, but she sank." Cross-examined, he faltered on timelines, admitting the racket's weight but claiming it floated away. After 5 days of witnesses, autopsy photos projected on sheets, letters reprinted in pamphlets sold curbside, the jury of 12 farmers and merchants deliberated 4 hours on December 4th, returning guilty of first-degree murder. Chester paled but smiled faintly, shaking hands with guards. Sentenced to death, appeals dragged to the New York Court of Appeals, which upheld in January 1908. Governor Charles Evans Hughes denied clemency in February, unmoved by petitions from Cortland socialites. Chester spent his final weeks at Auburn Prison, reading the Bible with chaplain Father Daniel Moriarty, confessing privately the blows but claiming panic, not intent. On March 30th, 1908, at age 24, he walked to the electric chair at 7 a.m. Last words, "It is of no great importance," as 1,800 volts ended it. His body went unclaimed, buried in an unmarked pauper's plot at Soul Cemetery in Auburn, later paved over. This case didn't just break hearts, it cracked open America's underbelly. In 1906, with women's suffrage a decade away and factory girls like Grace earning half men's wages, the trial spotlighted double standards. Chester's charm excused his wandering eye, while Grace's immodesty and loving freely damned her. Newspapers sensationalized her as the factory girl victim, fueling moral panics over urban temptations. Yet her letters humanized her, boosting sympathy for unwed mothers and inspiring maternity reforms. Legacy endures. Theodore Dreiser, haunted by clippings, fictionalized it as an American tragedy in 1925, a Pulitzer contender exploring class ambition's cost. Banned in Boston for immorality but selling millions. It spawned the 1931 film An American Tragedy, the 1951 A Place in the Sun with Montgomery Clift and Elizabeth Taylor, Oscar winner for adapted screenplay, and Jennifer Donnelly's 1903 young adult novel A Northern Light, winner of the Carnegie Medal. Non-fiction deepened it. Joseph W. Brownell and Patricia A. Warzashek's Adirondack Tragedy, 1986, with trial transcripts. Craig Brandon's Murder in the Adirondacks, revised 2017, including Gillette's Lost Diary, found 2007, sparse on remorse. Big Moose Lake remembers. Arrowhead Hotel hosts ghost tours. Grace's apparition in white wailing. The boathouse site a quiet memorial. Her letters at Hamilton College drawing researchers. The Herkimer Courthouse offers tours, its balcony where crowds jeered the verdict now echoing with history. Grace Brown's story, at its core, is one of betrayed trust in a world that offered women few escapes. A factory hum that drowned dreams. A lake that swallowed secrets. It forces us to ask how much has changed and at what cost. In the Adirondacks' quiet bays, her echo lingers, a call for justice long since served. That's our deep dive into the murder of Grace Brown, a tragedy that rippled from Cortland Mills to national conscience. If this stirred thoughts on love's perils or women's paths, share on socials. What's a story from your corner that still whispers? Until next time, tread careful by the water. I'm your host, Mike D., signing off from the heart of New England. Stay reflective, friends.